Since the very beginning, Pokemon has had the tradition of releasing third versions, because they need more money. These third versions shook up the games to provide fans of the originals with a slightly different experience. And the first of these heavily featured the series mascot in the form of Pokemon Special Pikachu Edition.
What mic do you use? It sounds great.
I don't know, I've never had problems.
Or more commonly referred to as Pokemon Yellow. Since its release, third editions have established themselves as a consistent component of the franchise, for the most part anyway. There's Pokemon Z. Okay, so I lied a bit. Pokemon Yellow isn't technically the first third version. That title goes to Pocket Monsters Blue, but it's more of a patched version of the originals, so I'm not counting it. It's my video, okay? Not counting it. Unlike Pokemon Red and Blue, I didn't get my hands on Pokemon Yellow until quite a few years after its release. I'm not exactly sure how long after its release that I got it, but I do remember playing it on my Game Boy SP, with it jutting out of the bottom. Pokemon Yellow is quite similar to Pokemon Red and Blue, sharing most of the core mechanics and systems of those entries. So for this video, I'm mostly going to be focusing on how this version differs from those titles. However, if you do want a more extensive look back at the Generation 1 games, I recommend watching my Red and Blue retrospective. Such a seamless plug. And with that said, let's take a look at the game that's based on the anime that is based on the game. Pokemon Yellow launched a year after the release of Pokemon Red and Blue. Its release was made to coincide with the launch of the Pokémon the First movie. In spite of Yellow's initial release in Japan as a black and white Game Boy title, before the introduction of Game Boy Color, it was somewhat colorized for its international distribution. For instance, each Pokemon has its own unique color scheme for its sprite, and each city has its own distinct shade of coloring. But these Game Boy Color enhancements are only one of the small changes made to the game.
I choose you, Pikachu.
The story of Pokemon Yellow is very similar to that found in Pokemon Red and Blue. But the opening is where we see the most noticeable changes to how the plot plays out. Once again, we get to pick our character name and also our rivals. Starting in our house in Pallet Town, when we walk into the tall grass, we are stopped by Professor Oak. After warning us of the dangers of stepping into the wild,
Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
Oak himself encounters a wild Pikachu and manages to catch it.
I can't believe you've done this.
Before leading us back to his laboratory. As we enter the lab, you'll note that there is only one Pokeball on the table instead of the 3 you'd expect. That's because in Pokemon Yellow, you don't get to choose your starter. Oak allows us to take the single Pokeball containing an Eevee as our partner Pokemon. Our rival, being the jerk that he is, suddenly becomes envious and shoves us out of the way, taking the Eevee for himself. Instead of Professor Oak responding like a sane person and being like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" he instead decides to give us the Pikachu he just caught. After the battle with our rival, Pikachu breaks out of its Pokeball, and from here on out, Pikachu will follow behind us as we travel through Kanto. As long as he remains in our party, that is. And if you do decide to place Pikachu into storage, he won't be happy. As this game sees the first implementation of a friendship system. Although this is rather basic in this entry and has little impact on the gameplay. Offering Pikachu items, helping him level up, and fighting against the gym leader together all contribute to establishing a stronger bond. Pikachu's friendship with you decreases when you put him in storage, when he faints in battle, and if you trade him away, he will basically hate you forever. Pikachu's happiness can be checked at any point by just talking to him. A little image of Pikachu's face will appear on screen, displaying his current mood. Sometimes Pikachu exhibit other moods under certain conditions. When Pikachu encounters the transformed Bill at the Sea Cottage, he will be confused. Pikachu will be sad when he's at low health. If Pikachu hears Jigglypuff's song in Pewter City Pokemon Center, or is asleep outside of battle, he will appear drowsy. If Pikachu is poisoned or burnt in battle, he will shudder as you are walking. Pikachu puts a bucket on his head when fishing. He is scared when in the Pokemon Tower. He will fall in love with the Clefairy in the Pokemon fan club, and then there is of course surprise Pikachu. In Route 19, a beach house was added. At the beach house you can play the Pikachu Beach minigame, but only if you have a Pikachu that knows the move Surf. So how do you get a surfing Pikachu? That's how you get it. Okay, so the only legitimate way to get a surfing Pikachu at the time was to either receive one through an event, but if you're like me, living in New Zealand, then good fucking luck with that, or by transferring one from Pokemon Stadium, meaning you need a copy of Pokemon Yellow, a Game Boy, a Nintendo 64, a copy of Pokemon Stadium, and a transfer pack just to play this minigame.
Money!
The goal of this minigame is to score as many points as possible. You control Pikachu using the directional pad. As Pikachu is launched over a wave, the left and right buttons can be pressed to cause Pikachu to do flips to earn points. And that's basically it. Now this may come as a shock to many of you, but I never got to play this minigame as a kid. Not just because the barrier for entry was so high, but even when I did have access to all of the equipment, I didn't know how to get the Pikachu. Although on the 3DS Virtual Consoles, I think you just have to have the Pikachu with you to play this game, so all those other requirements were taken out, thank God. If you're not a fan of Pikachu, this might not be the best version for you. With the popularity of Pikachu and the anime, it's no surprise that Game Freak wanted to capitalize on it. And Nintendo.
Money! The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Aside from Pikachu being more prominent in this version, there are a few other differences that distinguish this game from its predecessors. Even though we don't get to choose from the original 3 starters at the beginning of our journey, that doesn't mean that we don't get the opportunity to have them on our team. In Pokemon Yellow, it is actually possible to obtain all 3 of the starters, just like Ash did in the anime. When you arrive at Cerulean City, you will be able to receive 2 of the 3 starters. Charmander can be obtained from a trainer past the Nugget Bridge. All you have to do is talk to him. If you have a happy Pikachu, a small girl in Cerulean City will offer you a Bulbasaur. This is when the above mentioned friendship mechanic comes into play, and I don't think it's used anywhere else in the game. Squirtle is discovered a little bit later on. After defeating Lieutenant Surge, simply speak to the officer in the middle of Vermilion City and she will give you the former troublemaker Squirtle. The ability to get all 3 starters is a really cool feature. It provides an excellent starting point for assembling a team with decent coverage. In Yellow, some of Team Rocket Grunts will be replaced by Jesse and James, although they are still called Rocket Grunts for some reason. Maybe it's because their names don't fit within the character limit. Yeah, it doesn't fit. Jesse and James will battle with their signature Pokemon Ekans, Koffing and Meowth, with the first 2 evolving into their final forms as you progress through the story. Gym leaders also see their teams of Pokemon changed in Yellow to fall more in line with their teams in the anime. Also, some of their trainer sprites have been changed. Now Blaine isn't represented by a fat baldy man in the overworld. How disappointing. Our rivals Eevee will evolve differently depending on the outcomes of the battles with him. If we win the battle at the lab and the battle on Route 22, he will get Jolteon. If we win the battle at the lab and not the battle at Route 22, he will get a Flareon. If we lose both battles, he will get a Vaporeon. It's kind of like a dynamic difficulty setting, where the worse you do, the better the matchup will be against their starter, assuming that you'll be using Pikachu as your main throughout the game. That's about it for the significant changes in terms of simply playing through the story campaign. The gameplay mechanics didn't see much change, aside from some Pokemon being able to learn moves that they couldn't before, such as Charizard being able to learn Fly and Kadabra knowing Kinesis. I presume they were constrained in what they could alter with the fundamental gameplay because they wanted to maintain compatibility with Red and Blue. Due to this limitation, most of the iffy programming that I discussed in my Red and Blue retrospective is still in the Yellow version. But it just wouldn't be a Gen 1 game without all of that weirdness, now would it?
I know that Pokemon.
Graphics are important. I know it's a common thing now to be like, I don't care about graphics as long as the gameplay is good. I get the sentiment behind it, but that doesn't mean that graphics aren't important. But what is even more important is the game's aesthetic. And with Pokemon Yellow, it is the first time they really nailed the look of the Pokemon. Looking at these sprites in comparison to Red and Blue, I'm like, yes, this is what I remember them looking like, even though Yellow wasn't my first Pokemon game. While some of the sprites' poses are a bit
I'm relentless, I'm like the Terminator.
I'm more like Terminator than you.
I said it first, you're more like Sarah Connor. In the first movie too, before she could do chin-ups.
they are actually pretty spot on. Having Ken Sugimori's artwork as a reference made a huge difference, giving the sprites a cohesive style which I really felt was lacking for Red and Blue. Gengar looks so much better. Charizard has lost its rounded softness and its pose looks so dignified. The legendary birds actually look distinct and not just like big birds. They fixed Coughing's symbol and Kingler's claws as well as the eggs, but there are still a select few that I think don't look quite as good. Tentacruel lost a lot of its attitude. Ditto looks like he knows what his future holds, and Onix has pulled his back out. Unfortunately, nothing was changed for the back sprites and they still look a bit like a fever dream. Yellow has the best Gen 1 sprites in my opinion, so given that they are looking so good, how easy is it to catch them all?
Where's that Pokemon?
Like Pokemon Red and Blue, catching them all with just Pokemon Yellow is impossible, as there are version exclusives, everyone's favourite. A lot of the uncatchable Pokemon are those used by Team Rocket in the anime, so Jesse's and James's signature Pokemon cannot be caught. The Weedle line is no longer available because Ash caught a Caterpie, I guess. Pikachu can no longer be caught in Viridian Forest, and the Pikachu we receive cannot be evolved, so obtaining a Raichu is out of the question. And lastly, Magmar, Electabuzz and Jinx are unavailable because parents complained that Magmar and Jinx were too sexualized given Magmar's forehead and Jinx's
Voluptuous titty.
Okay, so I may have made that last part up. I have no idea why those Pokemon were left out. Along with Electabuzz, he also cannot be caught. Pokemon Yellow has about the same amount of exclusives as either Red and Blue. It does help that you can get all of the starters, but there is one huge downside to Yellow's available Pokemon, and that is it has shared version exclusives with both Red and Blue. Meaning if you have Pokemon Red and Pokemon Yellow, sorry, can't catch them all, as you won't be able to get the Meowth line or Magmar. If you have Yellow and Blue, you can't get the Ekans line or Electabuzz. So if you want to catch them all in Pokemon Yellow, you will need all 3 versions.
Money!
But maybe someone on the marketing team was warning you about this, as if we take a look at the game's box art, we can see that the Gotta Catch 'em All tagline is strangely absent.
Coincidence? I think not!
Bye-bye, Pikachu.
If Pokemon Yellow had been launched with Pokemon Red and Blue, I think I would have chosen that version, owing to my love of Pikachu
Call the police.
and my interest in the anime at the time. Whatever version you choose, the original Pokemon games are still a lot of fun to play. I don't think Pokemon Yellow offered enough changes in order to justify getting it if you had already played Red or Blue, especially if you want to fill out your Pokedex. It didn't really fix any of the glaring issues of Gen 1. I still stand by what I said in my Pokemon Red and Blue retrospective, that Fire Red and Leaf Green are the superior ways to experience the journey through Kanto.